Hello. Here we are again, not quite completely back at school, but at least able to get together through the computer. Um, it's Monday, March 30th, or this is the lesson for Monday, March 30th. So today you should have taken the quiz on Artemis and Apollo. So we're sticking to the same schedule that I handed out to you our last day of school. So now normally I would start the video by going over the story that you guys covered, Artemis and Apollo. But since I'm not sure if you've read that and taken the quiz on it yet, I won't do that today. But for tomorrow, Tuesday, March 31st, you should read Sons of Apollo and Hermes and taken the quiz on it. So what I want to ask is that you please be sure you have read that and taken the quiz before you watch the video for tomorrow. Okay, so the one thing I did want to do today in today's video is continue with Trojan War. We are getting down to the last few chapters. So when we left off before school got out, Patroclus had just been killed by Hector. And of course, this was all Ulysses' idea, figuring that either Achilles will, well, figuring that Achilles will have to avenge his best friend. So this next section is called Armor for Achilles. Patroclus sprawled in the bloody dust. Hector lifted his voice above the battle din. Take the body, men, bear it to Troy. I shall set his head on a pike on the city wall so that Achilles may meet his friend again face to face if he seeks to storm the wall. As for the body, we will throw it to the dogs. But before the Trojans could seize the body, Menelaus rushed up and straddled it, growling like a mastiff, it's kind of dog, fighting off everyone who approached. Other Trojans pressed forward. Other Greeks pressed in to aid Menelaus. A bloody battle raged over the corpse. What happened to the dead in those days was very important to the living. Bodies were not buried, they were cremated. The flames were made sacred by sacrifice to the gods, by libation, and by prayer. In the case of a great warrior or a king, or any person who had earned unusual respect during his lifetime, the death ceremonies would include funeral games, chariot races, wrestling, boxing, spear throwing, and archery, reflecting in form, the mourned one's aptitudes in manly pursuits. By such ceremonies and celebrations, it was felt, the dead person could depart in all honor. This sense of honor would ease his journey to the land of the dead and gave him status in Hades' kingdom. If sufficiently honored at his funeral, he would be singled out from among death's hordes by Charon, the grim boatman whose job it was to ferry them across the Styx. The honored one would not have to linger in a mob sorrowfully on this side of the Styx, but be ferried quickly across over by the status-conscious Charon to his reward in the land of the dead. On the other hand, if for some reason a corpse went unclaimed by friends or relatives, or was kept by the enemy and not given a proper send-off, then dreadful things would happen to the survivors. The dishonored dead could not cross the river Styx and enter Hades' kingdom. His spirit would cling to the site of his unregarded death, sort of haunting it. Wearing stinking rags of flesh, he would appear before family and friends, usually at night, howling, weeping, or begging. Or, worst of all, he would be found standing in any hidden corner, staring at you out of empty eye sockets. If you were unfortunate enough to have dealings with a ghost, you would set out his favorite food, which was black beans in little pots and shallow dishes of blood, and he would be appeased for a while by such delicacies, but not for very long. Soon he would reappear howling and begging or silently staring. In the case of the Greeks, demoralized as they were at this point of the battle, they still fought savagely for Patroclus's body, because they knew that Achilles would go berserk when he learned of his friend's death. But if Achilles also learned that the body of his beloved comrade had been taken by the Trojans and beheaded and then thrown to the dogs, they knew he would be capable of doing anything to friend or foe as well. In fact, it was probable he would visit his first vengeance upon the Greeks in that case. Thus, despite being outnumbered by the Trojans, they formed a hedge of spears around the body and would not let the Trojans pass. But Hector sent in more men, and the weight of their numbers must finally have broken the Greek resistance if it hadn't been for Achilles' horses, those magically bred stallions, tall as stags and fierce as harpies. They charged toward the knot of fighting men, burst into their midst, and hurled people in all directions. Rearing on their haunches, they struck with their front hooves, kicking and biting until they had cleared the Trojans away from the corpse. This allowed Menelaus time to lift the body and put it in the chariot. Then the horses galloped back towards Achilles' tent, bearing their dead charioteer. Patroclus had come very close to the Trojan wall before being killed, so the fighting had been beyond Achilles' sight, although he had been watching from the rampart, trying to follow the course of the battle. All he could hear was far-off shouting. All he could see was a cloud of dust. Under their walls, he said softly to himself, I told him not to advance so far. Still, perhaps it means that he has broken their lines and put them to flight. Then he saw a bright speck detach itself from the dust and fly toward him. He watched until it took shape. It was a chariot, coming with such speed it could be drawn only by Xanthus and Balius, his own stallions. His heart leaped with joy. It's Patroclus, he cried. It must be he. They will obey only his hand beside mine. He's safe, coming to report a great victory. With incredible speed, the west wind stallions galloped to the rampart, rearing and neighing when they saw Achilles there. He looked at them in amazement. Great tears were welling from their golden eyes. No one had ever seen horses cry before, and it was a terrible sight. He tried not to believe what those tears meant as he stood staring at the beautiful stallions. Then they broke their long primordial silence. Remember, it was believed the horses were smart enough to talk, these particular horses. Forgive us, dear master, said Xanthus. We bring back to you Patroclus. Dead, said Balius. We bring him back dead. Achilles didn't weep. His face was like a rock. Very gently he lifted the battered body from the chariot and bore it into his tent, binding the latchlets so that no one could enter. The stallions stood before the tent like watchdogs and let no one approach. Achilles remained alone with his grief all through this long twilight and the hours of night and the next morning. No one dared approach his tent and intrude upon his grief. The Greeks were afraid he might have fallen on his own sword, choosing to lie in death beside his comrade, but they didn't dare approach. He won't kill himself, said Ulysses. He has work to do. First, he must avenge himself upon Hector, and after that, perhaps, but not yet. In the darkest hour of the night, Thetis, that would be Achilles' mother, arose from the sea and walked through the walls of Achilles' tent. He had not wept, but mothers can hear silent grief. She had heard his, even in the depths of the sea, and had come to him. All night long he crouched in her embrace, not weeping, but making low, hoarse, whimpering sounds. She held his head to her breast as if he were a babe again, and stroked his face and kissed him. Even in his terrible grief, he was comforted by her sea magic touch. He spoke only at dawn, just before she left him. Will you do something for me, mother? He asked. Anything, son, she answered. Patroclus went to the battle clad in my armor. The Trojans stripped him of it, and it's worn by Hector now. The armor was made by Hephaestus and given to my father as a wedding present. I mean to seek Hector out and combat him today, but I wish to appear in armor no less fine than that I lost, and to bear weapons no less fine than those taken from Patroclus when he fell. These can issue only from the smithy of the gods. Could you persuade Hephaestus to labor this morning and forge me new gear? I do have some influence with the lame god, said Thetis. I was the one who nurtured him, after Zeus had flung him from Olympus, and Hephaestus had fallen into the sea with shattered legs, helpless as a tadpole. I took him to my cave and mended his wounds and raised him as my own child, giving him pebbles and seashells to make jewelry out of, so that he grew clever in that craft. He will drop what he's doing and labor this morning. Weapons and armor more beautiful than those you lost already will issue from his forge. By the time you are ready to combat Hector, you will find what you need here in your tent. Now farewell, dear son. On certain evenings, the sun, diving through the clouds, forges out the shape of armed men, taller than mountains, who burn in the western sky as if guarding the horizon. Their flaming, delicate armors what Hephaestus took as a model when he yielded to Thetis's plea and worked the morning through, casting new weapons for Achilles. Like the red-hot sun disk itself, written over with a tracery of cloud, was Achilles' new shield. His spear was a polished, volt-bright shaft that Zeus himself might have used as a lightning bolt. For helmet crest, he sheared a plume of cloud fleece and dipped it into the colors of the sunset. When he gave Thetis the gorgeous gear, the tall Nereid scooped up the little lame god and held him in her arms as if he were her child and kissed him on the lips. Thank you, my dear Hephaestus, she said. Thank you for your kindness, for your quickness, for your masterful craftsmanship. You are a great god now, artificer in chief for the whole flat world. Your smithy is a volcano where you weak implements for the high use of Father Zeus in the pantheon. But God though you be, you shall always remain my own dear little tadpole, my sweet-maned foster child. From me you shall always have a mother's tenderness, although I am cast an eternal flowing nymphood, and you an eternal middle age. She kissed his seamed, charcoal-grimed face, set him down, and flew off with the glittering new armor made for Achilles. Okay, let's see. The next section talks about, as powerful as the gods are, as far as what the Greeks believed back in those days, even more powerful were the fates. And this is about, the section's called the Scroll of the Fates. Every few years, the gods were entitled to read in the great book of the Fates, wherein all was written, all that had been and all that was to be. We use the word book, but there really were no books then as we know them. This tome of the Fates was a huge scroll hung from a place in the heavens beyond man's sight, written over with starry characters. Night blue was this scroll, made from the dark blue hide of a heavenly beast that was unknown to men, hunted by the gods once every 1,000 years in a great chase across the inlaid floor of heaven. Night blue was the scroll, and those winged crones who were the Fates, those twisted sisters whom even the gods feared, would dip their claws into starlight and scrawl their irrevocable decrees upon these dark pages. Once every several years, the gods were summoned to read what was written on the scroll, to consider what they had read, and then return to Olympus to conduct the affairs of men accordingly. So whatever the Fates wrote down, that's what was going to have to be. Usually, the gods chose to keep man in ignorance of what was fated for him, but occasionally, though, when it amused them or when they wished to seduce a mortal by special knowledge or when coaxed by artful oracles, the gods would let slip some information in the form of a riddle, and it was this matter that the oracles uttered as prophecy. These oracles tended to cluster together in groups called colleges, each of them dedicated to a special god. Apollo's priestesses were especially well known. They dwelt in the huge cave dug into the mountain at a place called Delphi. This was volcano country. So through a fissure in the rock, an aromatic steam arose from the very entrails of the earth. The priestesses set their stone tripods across this fissure and squatted above it, breathing these fumes, which they felt gave them visions. These visions, they claimed, were of the future. They also chewed laurel leaf, which we know as bay leaf, which sharpened the vision or blurred it, whatever it takes to make a vision more clear to those who have it. Their utterances were always couched in riddles, very complicated ones. No one could understand what they were saying except other priestesses, who for a fee could interpret the riddles. Now, prophecy about the Trojan War had made a rich tale from the very beginning. On this subject, soothsayers blabbed the secrets of the gods without any restraint. We've already met certain of these prophecies. The one which said the Greeks could win the war only with the help of Achilles. The second part of it, which said that Achilles must die before Troy would fall, but if he stayed at home and didn't go to the war, he could live a long, peaceful life. We already know the choice he made with the help of Ulysses, and Ulysses himself was the subject of a prophecy which said that if he went to Troy, he could not be returned to Ithaca until 20 years had passed, and when he came back, he would return alone, as a beggar, and unrecognized. Now on this day, following the death of Patroclus, the gods were summoned again to the far reaches of heaven to read the great scroll. It was the first time since the war had begun that they had been so summoned, and there was much new matter to be read in the flaming scroll of the Fates. The gods returned to Olympus brimming with news, some of them chattering, others sunk in meditation. All were trying to think how they could best use this knowledge of the future to tease man into providing some special entertainment in the years that lay ahead. They had three principal spokesmen to work through. Calchas and Chryseis were professional oracles. Chryseis, the Trojan, was a priest of Apollo. He was also father to Cressida. Calchas was the most influential among the Greek soothsayers. Sometimes he posed as a priest of Hera, at other times he claimed the special confidence of Athena. Actually, he freelanced, picking up clues from any god he could and making pronouncements about what the Greeks should or shouldn't do. When things were going well, he was listened to with half an ear. When disaster struck, his counsel became more valued. So professionally, he was not quite averse to catastrophe. So he liked when things were going bad because people listened to him more. But the one with the real heavy, fatal, burning talent for predicting the future was Cassandra. Bestowed upon her by Apollo was that most terrible of gifts, a memory of the future. And she kept her pronouncements rare because she knew how awful they were. However, she did not disturb the Trojan peace of mind at all, because you will remember that Apollo punished her for refusing his amorous advances by capping his gift with a curse. His sentence was that although she would be able to prophesy with the most utter accuracy, and she would know she was doing so, she would always be disbelieved by her own people. Nobody believed what she prophesied. Apollo came to her that night, sliding down one of the shafts of his sister's moonlight. He entered her chamber where she lay asleep, but she had trained herself never to sleep more than a few minutes at a time, because her dreams were so terrible. She awoke now and gazed upon him where he stood, igniting the shadows, and closed her eyes again. She said, "You are so unwelcome a sight, you must be a dream. It doesn't really matter. You've always ignored my need for privacy and walked through the walls of sleep as though they were open doors. So speak, my lord, why do you honor me with this visit?" "To impart to you," Apollo said, "certain matters that I have read in the starry scroll of the fates. There is much new information about Troy." Apollo spoke at length. The last thing he told her excited her unbearably. She knelt before him and clasped his knees and said, "O great Phoebus," meaning Apollo, "please, please, in this let me be believed. If he will believe me, perchance he will take the opportunity to save his life, brave though he be. Please let him believe what I tell him. If you do this, then I will put aside my loathing that I feel for you. I swear I will. Somehow, I don't know how, I will bring myself to respond to your love, but you must do this one thing for me." "Your idea of diplomacy," Apollo said, "my child, will never cease to astound me. But make no rash vows. In the first place, you will be unable to keep them, lest they go against your inmost nature. Secondly, even if you could, I cannot break my vow once given. This is a disability we gods all suffer from, and that's why we so seldom make promises. Farewell, I shall visit you again. Try to restrain your impatience until that golden hour comes." Chryseis found his daughter Cressida cutting flowers in the garden. He bustled up to her. "It's a very important day, my dear," he cried. "Much business brews." "How's that, father?" She was picking roses. Her slender fingers plucked and snipped, moving like white moths among the petals. Her face was flushed, making the roses look pale. Their fragrance was all about her. "I consulted the entrails of a pigeon this morning." That's one way they told the future oracles. He said, "A very informative set of guts. They told me that the high gods had been summoned by the fates to read the great scroll, but there was no hint at all of what they learned." "Well, perhaps another pigeon's on its way with the information," Cressida suggested. No, her father said, "the matter has not been published. That much I do know. They're being very closed-mouthed, the gods. I resorted to other devices. I cast dice, juggled numbers, even tried a few Eastern tricks with the conjunction of the stars, but no luck at all. The gods are silent, and I don't know what to think." "Well, keep eavesdropping. Perhaps you'll hear something," Cressida said. Girls in those days were very courteous to their fathers, even while being very bored by them. "It's absolutely essential that I learn something," Chryseis went on, "for the war has come to a most important pass. Prince Achilles will undoubtedly rejoin the fray. He will seek out Hector. Upon the Dardanian plain beneath our walls, the two greatest heroes upon all the flat earth will fight until one of them is killed. Now it's upon such days that oracles grow rich. If I can pick up even the tiniest scrap of information, I would be able to prophesy to Prince Hector concerning the duel, and he would give me splendid gifts. Yes, so noble-hearted is he, this eldest and strongest son of Priam, that he would reward even a gloomy prediction. And if by chance the forecast should be happy, who knows what treasures he would heap upon me." Just then Cressida saw him look past her shoulder and pin a greasy, fawning smile on his face. He made a deep bow. Cressida turned. She saw Princess Cassandra, who had entered the garden so silently it was as if she had been made to appear by magic. Cassandra saw the priest's daughters coming toward her with an armful of roses. To her, they seemed like little red flames. The girl was carrying a bouquet of flower in Cassandra's vision. Cassandra saw her in the midst of smoke and shrieks and falling timber, offering a lover her corsage of flames. She spoke icily to quench the pain of the roses. Greetings, Cressida, she said. I do not wish to interrupt your gardening. I have come to speak with your father. Cressida watched her father with distaste. The man was practically jigging with pleasure and importance as he led Cassandra toward a garden seat. Priest, said Cassandra, the gods last night consulted the scroll of the fates. I know they did, good princess, so I have divined. Have you divined what they were told? Unfortunately, no. Your patron Apollo has told you nothing? Not a word, not a word. I am hopeful of persuading him by my arts, but this takes time. Well, I have been told, said Cassandra. I know what the heavy oracles concerning Troy are. Can you perhaps, dear princess, find your way clear to confiding them in me? No, I can't. Well, that's a pity. But, Cassandra said, I have not come to your garden empty-handed. I will give you a single piece of information. It concerns my brother Hector. I will tell you so that you will tell him. If I tell him, I shall of course be disbelieved. In all modesty, he will believe me, said Chryseis. He knows that I... Yes, yes, said Cassandra. Listen closely now, for this is a conditional prophecy. If Hector fights Achilles, he will be killed. But Achilles cannot outlive Hector by more than 3 days. Well, you say if, Chryseis said. Is it not ordained that they must fight? Try to understand, Cassandra said, the way the gods entertain themselves, O oracle. There's always a margin of uncertainty injected into each edict concerning the future. That's the way the gods keep themselves in suspense about those affairs they themselves make up and make the spectacles more dramatic for themselves. This margin of uncertainty, this divine suspense is called man's will, those decisions he makes about his own affairs. If, my friend, is a tiny word of sublime proportions. If man properly taps the explosive strength of this pent-up possibilities, he can alter circumstances and thrust the gods themselves into entirely new situations. The word if heads this prophecy. If Hector fights, he dies. If Achilles kills Hector, he dies within 3 days. Make this clear to Hector. He can avoid the fight. He doesn't have to fight Achilles. In all honor, he can do so. No one else fights Achilles. Why should he? If he avoids this duel, he will live. Go and tell him. He will reward you. Here is a gold armlet set with rubies and sapphires to pay for the time you've given me. If Hector exercises his if and refuses to fight Achilles, then I shall add this armlet and a fat bag of gold. Cassandra pulled the heavy gold circlet off her arm and gave it to Chryseis, who fell to his knees when he took it. The princess nodded to Cressida and walked out of the garden. As Cressida crouched again among the roses, Aphrodite now began tampering with affairs. She had come back from her session with the fates, teeming with mischief. Plan after plan for confounding the Greeks danced through her head. Aphrodite, of course, is the goddess of love, controls who falls in love with who. In my quiet way, Aphrodite said to herself, it seems to me I have been much more influential than those brawling hags, Hera and Athena. After all, it was my gift of Helen to Paris that started all of this war. And who was it that embroiled Agamemnon and Achilles, instilling in them a desire for the same slave girl? And look what that led to. But now, however, with Patroclus dead and Achilles is sure to take the field. When he does, that mighty sword will shear through the delicate web of my contrivances. What then? All is not lost. Achilles must slay Hector if they fight, says the scroll of the fates. But if he does, he himself must die soon afterwards. If he does not come back to Hector, all is as it was before. But if he does, and they both die, then a new situation prevails. Diomedes will be the most formidable hero in the Greek camp. And I have a sharp grudge against that bully, Diomedes. Did he not dare to raise his lance against me, the goddess of love and desire, and wound me on the wrist? But wait, here's an idea. I can settle my grudge with him, and in doing so, throw the Greek camp into turmoil again. All this, by heaven, without even making a new plan. I'll use the old one. As I once set Agamemnon against Achilles, now, should Achilles die, I will set Agamemnon in murderous rivalry against Diomedes, and do it in the same way, through Cressida, whom Agamemnon held as a slave, and whose ways intoxicated him. Now I will infect Cressida with the sweet venom of love for Diomedes. She's already inclined that way, having watched him fight during his day of glory, and my job should be easy. Yes, I will raise admiration to passion that will burn in her veins and melt her bones. When she returns to Agamemnon's tent, nothing will keep her there. It is Diomedes she will want, Diomedes she will find her way to, hurling those two chieftains in each other's throats, dividing the Greeks into factions again and weakening them all together so that they will be incapable of an assault against my Trojans. Thereupon Aphrodite took a vial of thick, gooey red ointment that smelled of honey and baking bread, the odor of desire. Invisible, she flew to the garden of Chryseis and smeared with this venom of desire the thorns of the roses that Cressida was picking. The thorns prickled Cressida's hands. Suddenly she burned for Diomedes, and she knew that before the night had passed, she must find a way to get to him. But will he want me, she thought to herself. He's in love with battle. Killing Trojans is his one passion, and murder is an absorbing business. Will it leave room for gentler occupations like love? Agamemnon I could twist around my finger, but for this Diomedes I feel a kind of terror. I must make myself irresistible to Diomedes. But how? By giving him what he really wants most. What would that be? Victory over the Trojans. That's what he wants the most. If I can bring him some information that will help him achieve victory, then perhaps he will love me. Do I know any secrets? Nothing that's not commonly known. Chit-chat about the court, observations about personal habits of Priam's sons and daughters, that won't be useful to him. No, I need something big, important. If for only an hour I could be that sour-faced Cassandra with her talent for reading the future, then I could come to him filled with the authority of an oracle, a priestess of knowledge, and I could make him love me. But that's it, Cassandra, locked in her head, must be what I need to know. I must unlock it. But how? She despises me. Whom does she not despise? Her brother Troilus, that's who. She dotes on Troilus. Watching on the wall, she has eyes only for his deeds and his safety. She would tell Troilus what I want to know. Then I must try to know Troilus a little better. It should not be difficult. He has a roving eye, and it has occasionally rested on me. So, as we shall see, goddesses can be outwitted too, or rather can outwit themselves. For Aphrodite, attempting to confound the Greeks, has kindled a tiny flame that was to grow into a fire big enough to burn Troy even unto the last timber. So Chryseis visited Hector to tell him of Cassandra's prophecy, claiming it as his own. Hector interrupted him. Now remember that Cassandra was hoping Hector would decide not to fight Achilles because he doesn't have to. But Hector says, if I had any doubts about fighting Achilles, I am quite rid of them now. I have always expected him to vanquish me. His pedigree is much finer than mine. He's not only the son of Thetis, the queen of Nereids, but a great-grandson to Zeus himself. We lift our weapons against him in vain. With much pain we have learned that he cannot be hurt by spear cast or sword thrust. No arrow can wound him, no dart pierce his magically toughened hide, and in the use of weapons he has no equal. Yet I have always known I must challenge him one-on-one, for I am the best we have in Troy, and we must counter their best with ours. To challenge him, to meet him, to pray for strength and skill somehow to pierce that invulnerable hide, to do this and then to die, this I have known to be my fate ever since Paris returned with Helen from Sparta. To meet Achilles, to fall, to account myself lucky to be spared the sight of Troy being sacked, that's been the best I could hope for all along. Now you tell me that my death will lead to the death of Achilles, and you call that a gloomy prophecy? My dear man, it's the best news I have heard in almost a decade. I just hope I can trust it. I don't take much stock in readings of the future, you know. We have a prophetess in our family, meaning Cassandra, who claims to be divinely inspired. She's inevitably wrong. However, I shall do my best to believe what you tell me. Now I shall seek out Achilles with great joy, and joy strengthens a man's arm in battle. Pray, Prince Hector, consider. Chryseis starts to try and convince him not to fight again. That's enough, good Chryseis. You have pleased me. Don't spoil it. Take this bag of gold and go, and be sure to watch from the wall tomorrow. It should be an interesting afternoon. So the next chapter is called The Wrath of Achilles, and we'll find out what happens when Achilles and Hector fight each other. So again, since we have literature every day, I should be posting a video each school day that'll go along with the schedule I gave you. Try and read Sons of Apollo and Hermes before tomorrow, and take the quiz before you watch tomorrow's video, please. And there'll also be a religion video tomorrow for Tuesday, March 31st. So look for that also. Have a good day.